At 42 years old, Rebecca stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the simple white dress she'd borrowed from her younger sister. The fabric felt foreign against her skin. It had been 7 years since her divorce, and she never thought she'd be trying on a wedding dress again. But here she was, getting ready for the community marriage arrangement event at the local center. Her sister had convinced her to go, saying it was time to stop hiding behind her work and give love another chance. Rebecca had finally agreed, though her stomach churned with anxiety. The community center buzzed with activity when she arrived. Round tables filled the main hall, decorated with simple flower arrangements. Women sat on one side, men on the other. A coordinator moved between tables, making introductions and facilitating conversations. Rebecca took her seat among the other women. Most were younger, in their late 20s or early 30s. She felt out of place immediately. The woman next to her, barely 25, gave her a polite smile before looking away. The evening began. Men rotated from table to table, spending 15 minutes at each one. Rebecca's heart pounded as the first potential match approached. He was pleasant-looking, probably in his early 40s. They exchanged greetings. "So, tell me about yourself," he said with a warm smile. Rebecca began talking about her work as a nurse in the children's ward at the hospital. She loved her job, loved caring for sick kids and watching them recover. The man nodded along, seeming interested. "And you?" she asked. "What do you do?" "I run a small business." "Import and export," he replied. Then came the inevitable question. "How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" "I'm 42, Rebecca answered honestly. His smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I see." He glanced at his watch. That's nice." The rest of their 15 minutes dragged on with uncomfortable small talk. When the bell rang signaling the rotation, he excused himself quickly. The second man was worse. The moment she mentioned her age, he actually grimaced. 42? I was hoping for someone younger. "I want to have children, you know." Rebecca felt her cheeks burn. "I understand," she managed to say. The third man didn't even wait for the full 15 minutes. After learning her age, he politely excused himself, saying he needed to use the restroom. He never came back to her table. By the fourth rotation, Rebecca wanted to disappear. The man who sat across from her was younger, maybe 37 or 38. He seemed kind at first, asking about her interests and hobbies. But when the age question came up, his expression changed. "Look, I'm sure you're a wonderful person," he said gently. "But I'm looking for someone I can build a future with. Someone who..." Well, you understand, Rebecca understood perfectly. She was too old. Too old for second chances. Too old for new beginnings. Too old for love. Around her, she noticed other women engaging in animated conversations with their matches. Laughter floated through the air. Phone numbers were being exchanged. Connections were being made, but not at her table. The event coordinator, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patel, noticed Rebecca sitting alone during the break. She approached with a sympathetic expression that made Rebecca want to cry. "How are you doing, dear?" Mrs. Patel asked softly. "I'm fine," Rebecca lied. Mrs. Patel sat down beside her. "I know this can be difficult. These events, they're not for everyone." "You mean they're not for women my age," Rebecca said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Mrs. Patel sighed. "People have their preferences. Many men at these events are looking for younger women. It's just the reality. The harsh, cruel reality that a woman over 40 was somehow less valuable, less desirable, less worthy of love." Rebecca made it through the rest of the evening, enduring 3 more awkward encounters. By the time the event ended, she hadn't received a single callback card. Not one man had expressed interest in getting to know her better. She drove home in silence, still wearing the borrowed dress. When she reached her apartment, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The dress that had seemed hopeful that morning now felt like a costume, a ridiculous dream she'd been foolish enough to believe in. Rebecca unzipped the dress and hung it carefully on a hanger. She'd return it to her sister tomorrow. For now, she just wanted to forget this entire humiliating experience. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. 7 years ago, when her marriage had fallen apart, she'd thrown herself into work. The hospital became her sanctuary, the sick children her purpose. She'd volunteered at the shelter on weekends, organized fundraisers, and covered extra shifts whenever needed. Everyone said she was amazing, dedicated, compassionate, but no one said she was lovable. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. How did it go? Did you meet anyone nice? Rebecca stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. It was fine, just not for me. She didn't have the energy to explain what had really happened. How every man had looked at her like she was expired goods. How the number 42 had become a barrier she couldn't cross. Maybe she'd been right all along. Maybe romantic love wasn't meant for everyone. Maybe some people were meant to find fulfillment in other ways, through work and service and helping others. Rebecca finished her tea and prepared for bed. Tomorrow she had an early shift at the hospital. The children there didn't care how old she was. They just wanted someone to hold their hand when they were scared, someone to read them stories, someone to make them smile through the pain. That would have to be enough. As she turned off the lights, Rebecca made a decision. No more dating events, no more hoping for something that clearly wasn't going to happen. She was 42 years old, and it was time to accept her life for what it was. She'd been a fool to think a wedding dress would ever fit her again. Rebecca hadn't always been alone. There was a time when she'd believed in fairy tales and forever after. She'd gotten married at 28 to a man she'd met during nursing school. His name was Michael, and for the first few years everything seemed perfect. They'd bought a small house in the suburbs. She worked at the hospital while he climbed the corporate ladder at a tech company. They talked about having children someday, maybe 2 or 3. They planned vacations they never quite took and made promises they couldn't keep. The cracks started showing around year 5. Michael worked longer hours. Rebecca picked up more shifts. They stopped talking about children. They stopped talking about much of anything, really. Their conversations became transactional. Did you pay the electric bill? What time will you be home?
Can you pick up milk on your way?
By year 7, they were strangers living under the same roof. When Michael finally admitted he'd fallen in love with someone else, a colleague from his office, Rebecca wasn't even surprised. She was just tired. The divorce was relatively simple. No children to fight over. No complicated assets to divide. They sold the house, split the money, and went their separate ways. Rebecca was 35 years old and starting over. Those first months alone were the hardest. She'd wake up in her new apartment and forget, just for a moment, that everything had changed. She'd reach for someone who wasn't there anymore. She'd make too much coffee, set 2 plates instead of 1. Work became her escape. She volunteered for every extra shift available. The pediatric ward needed her, and being needed felt better than being alone. The children there, fighting their own battles with illness and pain, reminded her that her problems were small in comparison. One evening, about 6 months after the divorce, Rebecca was finishing her shift when she noticed a young girl sitting alone in the waiting room. The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing clothes that had seen better days. She clutched a small backpack and stared at the floor. "Are you waiting for someone, sweetie?" Rebecca asked gently. The girl looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "My mom was supposed to pick me up, but I think she forgot again." Rebecca's heart broke. She sat down beside the child. "What's your name?" "Lily." It turned out Lily's mother struggled with addiction. The girl often ended up at the hospital, either because she was sick or because there was nowhere else for her to go. A social worker eventually arrived to take Lily to a temporary shelter. That night changed something in Rebecca. She started volunteering at the children's shelter on her days off. The place was always understaffed and underfunded. Kids from difficult homes found temporary refuge there, waiting for foster placements or for their parents to get clean. Rebecca threw herself into the work. She organized art therapy sessions. She taught cooking classes. She read bedtime stories and helped with homework. The shelter director, a no-nonsense woman who'd been doing this work for 30 years, told Rebecca she was a natural. "These kids need someone who genuinely cares," the director said. "You've got a gift for this." Rebecca's sister, Victoria, worried about her. They met for coffee one Saturday morning about 2 years after the divorce. "You're going to burn yourself out," Victoria said, stirring sugar into her latte. "You work at the hospital all week, then spend every weekend at that shelter. When do you take care of yourself?" "I'm fine," Rebecca insisted. "I like staying busy." "You're hiding," Victoria replied bluntly. "You're using work to avoid dealing with the divorce. When was the last time you went on a date? Or even just out with friends?" Rebecca shrugged. "I'm not interested in dating." Once was enough. Not all men are like Michael. Maybe not. But I'm happy with my life the way it is. I don't need a man to feel complete. Victoria sighed but didn't push further. Over the next few years, she'd bring up dating periodically, suggesting apps or friends of friends who were single. Rebecca always had an excuse ready. Too busy, not ready, not interested. The truth was more complicated. Rebecca had convinced herself that she was fine alone, that she'd found her purpose in caring for others. That romantic love was overrated anyway. But late at night, when the apartment was too quiet and the bed felt too big, doubt crept in. She'd scroll through social media and see former colleagues getting married, having babies, celebrating anniversaries. She'd attend family gatherings where cousins showed off engagement rings and asked when she'd find someone special. "I'm focusing on my career," she'd say, with a practiced smile. Marriage isn't for everyone. People would nod sympathetically and she'd see it in their eyes. Pity. They thought she was making excuses. They thought she was damaged goods, too broken from her divorce to try again. Maybe they were right. By the time Rebecca turned 40, she'd built an entire life around helping others. Her apartment was small but comfortable. She had a few close friends from work. She attended yoga classes on Tuesday evenings and belonged to a book club that met monthly. On paper, her life looked full. But there were moments. Seeing elderly couples holding hands in the park, watching romantic movies alone on Friday nights, attending yet another wedding as the perpetual single guest. Those moments reminded her of what was missing. Still, she told herself it was fine. She was doing important work. The children at the hospital and shelter needed her. That had to be enough. Her sister never stopped trying, though. When Victoria heard about the marriage arrangement event, she'd practically forced Rebecca to register. "Just try," Victoria had begged. "What's the worst that could happen? You spend one evening meeting new people. If nothing comes of it, at least you tried." So Rebecca had tried, and now, lying in bed after that humiliating evening, she wished she hadn't. Victoria had been wrong. The worst that could happen wasn't simply meeting no one. The worst was being reminded over and over again that she'd missed her window, that at 42 she was too old for second chances. Rebecca pulled the blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd go back to work. Back to the children who didn't judge her. Back to the life she'd built from the ruins of her marriage. It wasn't the life she'd once dreamed of. But it was hers, and maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. 3 months passed after the disastrous matchmaking event. Rebecca had almost forgotten about it, buried the memory under layers of work and routine. Life continued as it always did. Morning shifts at the hospital, evening volunteering at the shelter, weekends filled with errands and quiet hours reading on her balcony. Then the invitation arrived. It came in a cream-colored envelope, addressed in elegant calligraphy. Rebecca opened it while sorting through her mail, expecting another charity fundraiser or community event notice. Instead, she found a wedding invitation. Jennifer Martinez, one of the younger nurses from the hospital, was getting married. Rebecca liked Jennifer. She was bright and enthusiastic, always volunteering to help with the difficult cases in pediatrics. They'd worked together for about 3 years, though they weren't particularly close. Rebecca's first instinct was to decline. She'd attended enough weddings in the past 7 years to last a lifetime. Always the single guest. Always making small talk with couples while feeling like a third wheel. Always catching the bouquet that nobody else wanted, and laughing it off like it didn't hurt. She set the invitation on her kitchen counter, planning to send her regrets with a nice card and a gift from the registry. But Victoria had other ideas. "You're going," her sister announced when she stopped by for their weekly dinner. She'd picked up the invitation and was reading it over. "It's at that beautiful garden venue outside the city. The food will be amazing." "I barely know Jennifer," Rebecca protested, stirring the pasta sauce on the stove. "It would be weird for me to go. She invited you. That means she wants you there. Besides, when was the last time you did something fun? Something that wasn't work-related?" Rebecca couldn't actually remember. "I have fun." "Reading medical journals doesn't count as fun," Victoria said. "Neither does reorganizing your closet or meal prepping for the week. You need to get out, talk to people, remember what it's like to enjoy yourself." "At a wedding, where I'll be surrounded by happy couples." Victoria softened, setting down the invitation and pulling her older sister into a hug. "I know it's hard. I know you're hurting. even if you pretend you're not. But hiding from the world isn't the answer. You're allowed to be happy too, you know? You're allowed to celebrate other people's joy without it being a reminder of what you don't have. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. What if it makes me feel worse? Then you leave early. But give it a chance. Please, for me. That's how Rebecca found herself 2 weeks later, wearing a blue dress and uncomfortable heels, walking into a garden reception venue on a warm Saturday afternoon. The ceremony was beautiful. Jennifer glowed as she walked down the aisle. Her groom looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Rebecca felt the familiar ache in her chest but pushed it down, clapping and smiling along with everyone else. The reception was held in a large tent decorated with white lights and flowers. Rebecca found her assigned seat at a table near the back, away from the head table where family and close friends sat. She was relieved to be somewhat hidden, less on display. The other people at her table were pleasant enough, a couple from the groom's side of the family, Jennifer's college roommate and her boyfriend. Everyone was polite, making small talk about the weather and how beautiful the bride looked. Rebecca picked at her food, counting down the hours until she could reasonably leave without being rude. She'd stay through dinner and maybe one dance, then slip out quietly. That's when she noticed him. Across the tent, at a table tucked in the corner, sat a man by himself. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Distinguished, with graying hair and glasses. He wasn't on his phone like most solo guests. He was just sitting quietly, watching the celebration with a slight smile. Their eyes met for a brief moment across the crowded tent. Rebecca looked away quickly, feeling silly for staring. He probably had a wife in the bathroom or was saving a seat for someone. She was just imagining things, seeing what she wanted to see. The music started and couples filled the dance floor. Rebecca watched them sway together, remembering what it felt like to be held like that, to move in sync with another person, to belong to someone. She excused herself from the table, needing air. Outside the tent, the garden was peaceful. String lights illuminated pathways between flower beds. She could hear the muffled music and laughter from inside. Beautiful evening, isn't it? Rebecca turned to find the man from the corner table standing a few feet away. Up close, he was even more attractive. Kind eyes behind his glasses, a genuine smile that reached those eyes. Yes, it is, she managed to say. I'm Nathan, he said, extending his hand. I work with Jennifer's husband at the architecture firm. Rebecca. I work with Jennifer at the hospital. They shook hands, and she was surprised by how warm his grip was, how natural it felt. Not a fan of wedding receptions? Nathan asked, nodding toward the tent. Rebecca laughed softly. Is it that obvious? Well, we're both hiding out here in the garden instead of dancing, so I'd say we're in the same boat. They started walking along one of the paths, falling into easy conversation. Nathan explained that he'd recently moved to the city for work, didn't know many people yet. Rebecca found herself telling him about her work at the hospital, carefully editing out the parts about using work to fill the emptiness in her life. He was easy to talk to. He didn't interrupt or try to one-up her stories. He asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. It had been so long since anyone had really listened to her that Rebecca almost forgot to guard herself, almost forgot that opening up usually led to disappointment. Do you want to go back in? Nathan asked after they'd been walking for about 20 minutes. I think they're cutting the cake soon. Rebecca nodded, and they made their way back to the tent. But instead of returning to their separate tables, Nathan gestured to an empty spot beside him at his table. Would you like to sit together? Save us both from making awkward small talk with strangers? She hesitated for just a moment before agreeing. They spent the rest of the evening talking, barely noticing as the reception continued around them. Rebecca learned that Nathan was 48, divorced for 5 years, no children. He loved architecture and hiking and old movies. He volunteered at a community garden on weekends. For the first time in months, maybe years, Rebecca felt something other than resigned contentment. She felt a flutter of possibility. As the reception wound down and guests started leaving, Nathan walked Rebecca to her car. I really enjoyed talking with you tonight, he said. Would it be okay if I got your number? Maybe we could grab coffee sometime. Rebecca's heart raced. Every instinct told her to protect herself, to say no, to avoid the inevitable disappointment. But Victoria's words echoed in her mind. You're allowed to be happy too. "I'd like that," she said, and gave him her number. Driving home that night, Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Nathan did call. Just 2 days after the wedding, Rebecca's phone buzzed with an unknown number while she was finishing her shift at the hospital. "Hi, it's Nathan. From the wedding? I was wondering if you'd like to get that coffee this weekend." They met at a small cafe downtown. One coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into a walk through the park. They talked for hours, and when they finally said goodbye, Nathan asked if he could see her again. Over the next 2 weeks, they went on 3 more dates. Dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. A movie at the old theater that showed classics. A Sunday morning breakfast that stretched into early afternoon. Each time, Rebecca felt herself relaxing a little more, trusting a little more. But she was also careful. She didn't tell him about the failed matchmaking event or the years of loneliness. She kept their conversations light, sharing stories from work but not the deeper fears that kept her up at night. She was enjoying this, whatever it was, but she wasn't ready to be vulnerable yet. Then came the Children's Festival. The shelter where Rebecca volunteered organized it every year. It was a day dedicated to the kids who lived there temporarily, giving them a chance to just be children. There were games, food stalls, face painting, and donated toys. Local businesses sponsored activities, and volunteers from all over the community showed up to help. Rebecca had been planning the festival for months. It was one of her favorite events, seeing the children's faces light up, hearing their laughter, watching them forget their troubles for a few hours. She arrived early that Saturday morning to help set up. The shelter's backyard had been transformed into a colorful carnival. Streamers hung between trees, balloons bobbed in the breeze. Tables were loaded with snacks and craft supplies. By 10 o'clock, the festival was in full swing. Children ran, between activity stations, their excited voices filling the air. Rebecca managed the face-painting booth, carefully transforming eager faces into butterflies, tigers, and superheroes. She was finishing a rainbow design on a little boy's cheek when she noticed someone familiar across the courtyard. Nathan was there. He stood near the games area, looking slightly out of place among all the chaos. But what caught Rebecca's attention was the small girl holding his hand. She looked about 6 years old, with dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail. While other children ran and played around them, this little girl stood perfectly still, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest. Nathan was crouched down, talking to the girl, clearly trying to encourage her to join the other children. The girl shook her head, pressing closer to his side. Rebecca felt her chest tighten. The girl had that look. She'd seen it too many times in her years at the shelter. The look of a child who'd experienced something no child should have to experience. Eyes that were too old for such a young face. She finished with her current customer and called over another volunteer to take over the face painting. Then she made her way across the courtyard. Nathan looked up as she approached, surprise and relief crossing his face. "Rebecca, I didn't know you'd be here." "I volunteer here," she explained, then smiled gently at the little girl. "Hi there, my name is Rebecca. What's yours?" The girl didn't answer, just held her rabbit tighter. "This is Sophie," Nathan said softly. "My niece. She's staying with me for a while." Rebecca knelt down to be at Sophie's eye level, careful not to crowd her. She recognized the signs of trauma, the wariness in those young eyes. "That's a beautiful rabbit," Rebecca said. "Does he have a name?" Sophie looked at the stuffed animal, then back at Rebecca. For a long moment she didn't speak, then barely above a whisper, "Mr. Hoppy." "Mr. Hoppy is a perfect name," Rebecca said warmly. "Would you and Mr. Hoppy like to come see the face painting booth? We can paint whatever you want. Butterflies, flowers, hearts. Anything." Sophie looked up at Nathan, who nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, sweetheart. Rebecca is really nice. She helps children just like the people here at the shelter." Slowly, Sophie nodded. Rebecca led them back to the face painting booth, keeping her movements calm and predictable. She'd learned years ago that children who'd been through trauma needed to feel safe, needed to know what to expect. Sophie climbed into the chair, still holding Mr. Hoppy. What would you like? Rebecca asked, showing her the design samples. Sophie pointed shyly at a purple butterfly. As Rebecca carefully painted the design on Sophie's cheek, the little girl gradually relaxed. She didn't talk much, but she stopped gripping the rabbit quite so tightly. When Rebecca held up the mirror to show her the finished butterfly, the smallest smile appeared on Sophie's face. "It's beautiful," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. Rebecca glanced at him and saw his eyes were wet. This was clearly the first time he'd seen his niece smile in a while. "Would you like to do some crafts?" Rebecca asked Sophie. "We have a tent where you can make bracelets and paint pictures." Sophie looked uncertain, but after Rebecca promised that Nathan and Mr. Hoppy could come too, she agreed. They spent the next hour at the craft tent. Sophie worked on a beaded bracelet with intense concentration. Nathan sat beside her, trying to make his own bracelet but mostly just tangling the thread. His fumbling made Sophie giggle, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted Nathan. During a quiet moment while Sophie was focused on choosing beads, Nathan leaned closer to Rebecca. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I've been trying for weeks to get her to open up. You managed it in minutes." "She just needed to feel safe," Rebecca replied. "What happened to her, if you don't mind me asking?" Nathan's expression darkened. "Her mother, my sister, passed away 2 years ago. Car accident. Sophie's father wasn't in the picture, hadn't been since she was a baby. Our parents are elderly and couldn't take care of a young child full-time, so I became her guardian." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said, her heart breaking for this little girl. "I'm doing my best, but I work long hours at the firm. She has a nanny during the week, and I've been taking her to counseling, but she's still so closed off. She barely speaks. She doesn't play with other kids. She has nightmares almost every night." Nathan's voice cracked. "I don't know how to help her. I'm not a father. I don't know what I'm doing." Rebecca put a hand on his arm. "You're here. You're trying. That's what matters. These things take time. Uncle Nathan, look." Sophie held up her finished bracelet, a crooked but colorful creation of purple and pink beads. "That's amazing," Nathan said, and Rebecca could see genuine pride in his eyes. Sophie held out the bracelet. "For you." Nathan's face crumpled as he took the bracelet and put it on his wrist. "I'll wear it every day. Thank you, sweetheart." Then Sophie did something unexpected. She made a second bracelet and when it was finished, walked over to Rebecca. "For you," she said shyly, holding it out. Rebecca accepted the gift, slipping it onto her wrist. "Thank you, Sophie. I love it." For the rest of the festival, the three of them stayed together. Sophie gradually became more animated, showing them her painted picture and trying the ring toss game. She still held Mr. Hoppy, but not quite as desperately. As the festival wound down and families started leaving, Sophie took both Rebecca's and Nathan's hands, standing between them. "Can we come back?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Rebecca said. "The shelter has activities every Saturday. You're welcome any time." Nathan looked at Rebecca with something deeper than gratitude in his eyes, something that made her heart skip. They walked Sophie to Nathan's car. As he was buckling her into her car seat, Sophie looked up at Rebecca. "Will you be here next week?" "I will," Rebecca promised. "Okay," Sophie said, and gave her the smallest wave goodbye. As Nathan closed the car door, he turned to Rebecca. "I know we've only been on a few dates, but would you mind if we did this again? Coming to the shelter, I mean. I think Sophie really connected with you." Rebecca smiled. "I'd like that." Driving home that evening, Rebecca realized something had shifted. She'd gone into this thing with Nathan carefully, protecting herself, keeping walls up. But watching him with Sophie, seeing his patience and love for his niece despite his own uncertainty and fear, those walls had started to crumble. Maybe, just maybe, this could be something real. The next Saturday, Nathan and Sophie showed up at the shelter, right when Rebecca's volunteer shift started. Sophie still carried Mr. Hoppy, but this time she walked in without hesitation, heading straight for Rebecca. "Can we paint today?" the little girl asked quietly. Absolutely, Rebecca said, delighted to see her again. We have watercolors set up in the art room. This became their routine. Every Saturday, Nathan would bring Sophie to the shelter. While he helped with repairs and heavy lifting, tasks that the shelter's elderly maintenance man could no longer manage, Rebecca and Sophie would do activities together. They painted pictures. They read stories. They baked cookies in the shelter's small kitchen, Sophie standing on a stool to help mix the dough. Slowly, week by week, the little girl opened up. One Saturday, about a month into these visits, Sophie was helping Rebecca frost cupcakes for another child's birthday. My mama used to make cupcakes, Sophie said suddenly. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother without being prompted. Rebecca's heart squeezed, but she kept her voice gentle and casual. Yeah, what kind did she make? Chocolate ones, with pink frosting. Sophie concentrated hard on spreading frosting across a cupcake. She sang while she cooked. Silly songs that she made up. She sounds wonderful. She was. Sophie's voice was so small. I miss her. Rebecca set down her own cupcake and pulled Sophie into a side hug. Of course you do, sweetheart. It's okay to miss her. It's okay to feel sad. Sophie leaned into the embrace, and Rebecca felt the little girl's shoulders shake with silent tears. They stayed like that for several minutes until Sophie pulled back and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Can we still finish the cupcakes? She asked. Of course we can. They continued decorating, and Sophie even managed a small smile when Rebecca accidentally got frosting on her own nose. Nathan noticed the change when he came to pick up Sophie that afternoon. His niece was more talkative during the car ride home, telling him about the cupcakes and the new friend she'd made at the shelter. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Nathan called Rebecca. I don't know what you're doing, he said, but it's working. She's talking more. She's sleeping better. She even laughed at dinner tonight. Really laughed? She's a resilient kid, Rebecca said. She just needed time and someone patient enough to let her heal at her own pace. It's more than that. It's you. Nathan paused. Rebecca, I know this is complicated. I come with baggage now. I'm responsible for a traumatized 6-year-old who needs stability and consistency. I'd understand if that's not something you want to be part of. Rebecca had been expecting this conversation. She'd thought about it herself late at night when she couldn't sleep. Getting involved with Nathan meant getting involved with Sophie. It meant taking on responsibility for a child who'd already lost so much. It would be messy and difficult and nothing like the simple romance she'd imagined might be possible. But then she thought about Sophie's small hand in hers. The way the little girl had hugged her after she'd cried about her mother, the trust in those dark eyes that had once been so guarded. I care about Sophie, Rebecca said honestly, and I care about you. This might not be what I expected, but that doesn't mean it's not what I want. She could hear Nathan's relief through the phone. Really? Really? Their relationship deepened after that. Nathan started bringing Sophie over for dinner at Rebecca's apartment. The little girl loved helping Rebecca cook, standing on her step stool and carefully measuring ingredients. She'd set the table with intense concentration, making sure each fork and napkin was perfectly placed. Rebecca taught Sophie to make her grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies. The recipe had been passed down through 3 generations, and now she was sharing it with this child who'd stolen her heart. When you mix the butter and sugar, Rebecca explained, you have to cream it really well. That's what makes the cookies soft. Sophie nodded seriously, watching as Rebecca demonstrated with the electric mixer. Can I try? She asked. Of course. Rebecca guided Sophie's small hands on the mixer, helping her hold it steady. When they pulled it out, Sophie gasped in delight at the fluffy mixture. It looks like clouds. Nathan watched from the doorway, and when Rebecca glanced at him, the expression on his face made her breath catch. He was looking at her the way people in movies looked at each other, like she was something precious and unexpected. The cookies turned out perfectly. They ate them warm from the oven, and Sophie declared they were even better than the ones her mother used to make. Then she froze, looking guilty as if she'd betrayed a sacred memory. It's okay to enjoy new things, Rebecca said gently. Your mama would want you to be happy. She'd want you to make new memories. That doesn't mean you love her any less. Sophie thought about this, then nodded slowly. Can I have another cookie? They all laughed, and the moment passed. Later, when Sophie had fallen asleep on Rebecca's couch, curled up with Mr. Hoppy and a blanket, Nathan and Rebecca sat together in the kitchen. She's never fallen asleep anywhere but her own bed, Nathan said quietly, looking at his niece with wonder. Not since the accident. She's always been too anxious. She feels safe here, Rebecca said. So do I. Nathan took Rebecca's hand. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. After my divorce, I convinced myself I was better off alone. Then Sophie came into my life and I was so focused on figuring out how to be her guardian that I didn't even think about dating or relationships. And now? Rebecca asked. Now I can't imagine my life without you in it. He squeezed her hand. Both of our lives. Sophie adores you. She talks about you constantly. She draws pictures of you. Yesterday she asked me if you could be her mama. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. What did you say? I said that would be up to both of you and that we shouldn't rush things. Nathan paused. But I wanted to be honest with you about where my heart is. I'm falling in love with you, Rebecca. And I think Sophie already loves you. Rebecca had spent so many years protecting herself, building walls, convincing herself she didn't need anyone, but sitting in her kitchen with this man and his sleeping niece in the next room, she realized those walls had already crumbled. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. Both of you. Nathan pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Over the next few months, they became a unit. Rebecca attended Sophie's counseling appointments with the therapist's approval. She helped with bedtime routines when the nightmares came. She braided Sophie's hair in the mornings and packed special notes in her school lunch. Sophie started calling her Miss Rebecca, and then, gradually, just Rebecca. The title changes felt significant, like they were building toward something. Nathan was different from Michael in every way. He communicated. He showed up. He shared the load. When Rebecca had a hard day at the hospital, he'd come over with takeout and let her talk through her feelings. When she was running late for a shift, he'd handle getting Sophie ready for school. It felt like partnership, like equality, like what love was supposed to be. One evening, Rebecca arrived at Nathan's house for dinner and found Sophie in tears at the kitchen table. What's wrong, sweetie? Rebecca asked, immediately kneeling beside her. We had to make family trees at school, Sophie sobbed. Everyone else had a mama and a papa. I only had Uncle Nathan and my grandparents. The other kids said my family was wrong. Rebecca's heart shattered. She pulled Sophie into her arms, letting the little girl cry against her shoulder. Your family isn't wrong, Rebecca said firmly. Families come in all different shapes and sizes. Some kids have two parents, some have one, some live with grandparents or aunts and uncles. What matters isn't how many people are in your family or who they are. What matters is that they love you. But everyone else has a mama, Sophie hiccuped. Rebecca looked up and saw Nathan standing in the doorway, his eyes questioning. She made a decision in that moment, one her heart had been leading her toward for weeks. Sophie, I want to tell you something. She pulled back to look at the little girl's tear-stained face. I love you very much. And I love your Uncle Nathan. We're not related by blood, but I think of us as a family. Would it be okay with you if I was part of your family? Sophie's eyes widened. Really? Really? Does that mean you could be my mama? Rebecca's throat tightened. I could never replace your real mama. She'll always be your mama, and it's important to remember her and love her. But if you want, I could be like a mama to you. Someone who takes care of you and loves you and is here for you. Sophie threw her arms around Rebecca's neck. Yes, I want that. When Rebecca looked up again, Nathan was wiping tears from his own eyes. Later that night, after Sophie was tucked into bed, Nathan held Rebecca close. You just made that little girl's dreams come true, he said. Mine too. Rebecca smiled, feeling more content than she had in years. She made mine come true too. Both of you did. The seasons changed, and with them, their little family grew stronger. Summer melted into fall, and Rebecca found herself deeply woven into the fabric of Nathan and Sophie's daily lives. She had a drawer at Nathan's house now, then 2 drawers, then half the closet in the spare bedroom. Sophie had insisted, saying that Rebecca needed a place for her things since she was there almost every day anyway. The little girl had transformed over the past months. She laughed freely now, played with other children at the shelter without hesitation, and her nightmares came less frequently. She still carried Mr. Hoppy everywhere, but he wasn't a security blanket anymore, just a beloved friend. One Saturday afternoon in October, they visited a pumpkin patch. Sophie raced between the rows of pumpkins searching for the perfect one. This one, she called out, pointing to a lumpy, lopsided pumpkin that was definitely not Instagram-worthy. Are you sure? Nathan asked, eyeing the much rounder pumpkins nearby. What about one of these? No, this one has character, Sophie insisted, a phrase she'd clearly learned from Rebecca. It's special because it's different. Nathan and Rebecca exchanged amused glances. She's got a point, Rebecca said. They lugged the massive pumpkin to the car and spent the evening carving it on Nathan's back porch. Sophie drew the face she wanted and Nathan carefully cut along her lines while Rebecca scooped out the insides. Ooh, it's so slimy, Sophie giggled, sticking her hands into the pumpkin guts. They roasted the pumpkin seeds with cinnamon and sugar, and when they lit the jack-o'-lantern that night, Sophie declared it was the best pumpkin in the entire world. Rebecca took a photo of Sophie standing proudly beside it, and another of the three of them together. Later, she'd print those photos and add them to the growing collection on Nathan's refrigerator. Proof that they were building something real, but not everything was perfect. There were hard days too. One evening, Rebecca arrived to help with Sophie's bedtime routine and found the little girl curled up in her closet crying softly. Sophie? Sweetheart, what's wrong?
I had art class today,
Sophie said through tears. We were supposed to paint pictures of our families for parent night. I painted you and Uncle Nathan, but then Tommy said you weren't my real family because you're not my actual mama and papa. Rebecca's heart clenched. She climbed into the closet and sat beside Sophie, their backs against the wall. Tommy doesn't understand, Rebecca said gently, and that's okay. Not everyone knows that families can look different, but you know what? Family isn't just about who gave birth to you. It's about who shows up. Who takes care of you when you're sick, who celebrates your victories and comforts you when you're sad, who loves you no matter what. You do all those things, Sophie said, because I love you. Uncle Nathan and I both love you so much. Sophie leaned against Rebecca's shoulder. I wish you were my real mama. I may not have given birth to you, but my love for you is real. That makes me as real as any mama could be. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said something that broke Rebecca's heart. My birth mama didn't leave on purpose, did she? She didn't choose to go away? No, sweetheart. She didn't choose to leave you. What happened was an accident, something no one could control. Your mama loved you more than anything in this world. If she could have stayed, she would have. Do you think she'd be okay with you being my mama now? Rebecca felt tears on her own cheeks. I think she'd be grateful that you have people who love you and take care of you. I think she'd want you to be happy. They sat in the closet for a long time, just being together. Eventually, Sophie fell asleep against Rebecca's shoulder, exhausted from crying. Rebecca carefully carried her to bed and tucked her in, placing Mr. Hoppy beside her. Nathan found Rebecca in the kitchen afterward, making tea with shaking hands. She told me what happened at school, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Are you okay? Kids can be cruel, Rebecca said. Even when they don't mean to be. But you handled it perfectly. You always do. Rebecca turned in his arms. Nathan, I need to ask you something. Where is this going? We've been together for almost 7 months now. I'm practically living here. Sophie calls me her mama. But we haven't talked about the future. About making this official. Nathan pulled back slightly, his expression serious. I've been thinking about that. A lot, actually. Rebecca's heart started pounding. And I want to marry you, Nathan said simply. I want you to officially be Sophie's mother. I want us to be a real family, legally and in every other way. I'm scared. Of what? Of rushing you. Of assuming you want the same things I want. You've built this entire independent life for yourself. You have your career, your volunteer work, your freedom. Taking on a ready-made family, officially becoming a stepmother to a child with trauma, dealing with all the complications that come with that. It's a lot to ask. Rebecca set down her tea and took both of his hands. Nathan, I love you. And I love Sophie. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, there are challenges. But I've never been more sure of anything in my life. This isn't me giving up my independence or sacrificing my dreams. This is me choosing to build new dreams that include both of you. You really mean that? I really do. Nathan's face broke into a wide smile. He kissed her deeply, and when they pulled apart, he said, Then let's do this right. Let me plan something special. I want to propose properly the way you deserve. Rebecca laughed. You just said you want to marry me. Isn't that a proposal? That was just the warm-up. The real proposal is going to be something Sophie and I planned together. She deserves to be part of this too. 2 weeks later, Rebecca came home from a particularly long shift at the hospital to find a note slipped under her apartment door. Come to the shelter garden at sunset. Dressed nice. Love, Nathan and Sophie. Curious and excited, Rebecca showered and put on her favorite blue dress, the one she'd worn to the wedding where she'd first met Nathan. She drove to the shelter, her heart racing with anticipation. The garden had been transformed. String lights hung between trees, casting a warm glow as the sun set. A path of flower petals led to the center of the garden, where Nathan and Sophie waited. Sophie wore her nicest dress and held a small basket. When she saw Rebecca, her face lit up. You came. We've been waiting. I wouldn't miss this for the world, Rebecca said, walking toward them. As she got closer, she saw that the garden benches were lined with photos, pictures of the three of them over the past months. At the pumpkin patch, baking cookies, playing at the shelter, building a snowman. Each photo captured a moment of their growing family. Sophie walked forward and took Rebecca's hand. We made this for you. Uncle Nathan said when you ask someone to be your family forever, you should show them all the reasons why. Tears were already streaming down Rebecca's face. Nathan stepped forward, and Rebecca saw that his eyes were wet too. He got down on one knee. Rebecca, 7 months ago I came to a children's festival with a scared little girl who wouldn't talk to anyone. You showed us both what love looks like. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind. The kind that shows up, the kind that stays. The kind that turns 3 broken people into a family. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a simple, beautiful ring. I'm not offering you a perfect life. I'm offering you a life with us, with all our complications and challenges and baggage. But I promise to love you, support you, and build a future with you. Will you marry me? Before Rebecca could answer, Sophie tugged on her dress. And will you be my mama, for real and forever? Rebecca dropped to her knees, pulling both Sophie and Nathan into an embrace. Yes, she sobbed. Yes to everything. To marriage and family and forever. Yes. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger while Sophie jumped up and down, clapping her hands. We're a real family now, Sophie announced to the empty garden. Rebecca's going to be my mama. As the 3 of them held each other in the fading light, surrounded by memories they'd created together, Rebecca realized something. She'd spent so many years believing her chance at love had passed. That at 42 she was too old for new beginnings. But she'd been wrong. Love didn't follow a timeline. Family didn't fit into neat little boxes. And happiness didn't come with an expiration date. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Exactly when she was meant to be there. Finally, after years of feeling like she'd missed her chance, Rebecca had found her home. The engagement should have been the happiest time of Rebecca's life. And for the first few days, it was. She floated through her shifts at the hospital, catching herself staring at the ring on her finger. Sophie told everyone at school that Rebecca was going to be her new mama. Nathan started looking at houses big enough for all 3 of them. Everything was falling into place. Then the doubts started creeping in. It began small. Rebecca was at the grocery store when she overheard 2 women talking in the next aisle. Did you see that Henderson couple got engaged? He's 48 and she's, 29? Good for him. Men can do that, the other woman replied. But can you imagine if it was reversed? A 48-year-old woman with a younger man? People would call her desperate. Rebecca pushed her cart away quickly, but the words stuck with her. She looked down at her left hand at the engagement ring that had felt like a miracle just days ago. She was 43 now. Nathan was 48. It wasn't a huge age gap. But that wasn't what bothered her. What bothered her was the realization that she'd be 44 when they got married. 45 when Sophie turned 8. 50 when Sophie was a teenager. Would she have the energy to keep up with a growing child? Would she be the old mom at school events? Would Nathan eventually regret choosing someone his age when he could have found someone younger? Someone who could give him more years? The thoughts were poison. And once they started, they wouldn't stop. That evening, Victoria came over to celebrate the engagement. Rebecca had been avoiding her sister's calls, but Victoria showed up anyway with a bottle of champagne and a huge grin. "Let me see the ring," Victoria squealed, grabbing Rebecca's hand. Oh, it's beautiful. I'm so happy for you. Thanks, Rebecca said, trying to match her sister's enthusiasm. Victoria's smile faded. What's wrong? You just got engaged to an amazing man who loves you. You're getting the family you've always wanted. Why do you look like someone died? Rebecca sank onto the couch. I don't know if I can do this. What? Why not? Look at me, Victoria. I'm 43 years old. I'm set in my ways. I've lived alone for 7 years. What if I can't adapt to being a wife and mother? What if I'm too old for this? Too old, Victoria's voice rose. Rebecca, you're 43, not 93. Women have babies at your age. They start new careers, run marathons, go back to school. When did you start thinking 43 was ancient? It's not just my age. It's everything. Rebecca twisted the ring on her finger. Nathan deserves someone better, someone younger and more flexible, someone who can grow with him instead of someone who's already grown and set and stuck. Oh my God, you're doing it again, Victoria said, sitting beside her sister. You're finding reasons to sabotage your own happiness. You did this with your nursing degree, remember? You almost didn't apply because you thought you weren't smart enough. Then you almost quit during your first year because you thought you didn't belong. But you pushed through and became an incredible nurse. This is different. How? How is it different? You're just scared. You've been alone for so long that the idea of letting someone in, of being vulnerable, terrifies you. So you're creating problems that don't exist. Rebecca felt tears burning her eyes. What if he's only marrying me because I'm good with Sophie? What if it's gratitude instead of love? Have you seen the way that man looks at you? He's head over heels. And yes, the fact that you're amazing with his niece is important to him. But that's not why he loves you. He loves you because you're kind and strong and beautiful inside and out. But what if— Stop, Victoria said firmly. Stop with the what-ifs. Life is full of what-ifs. What if you get married and it doesn't work out? What if you don't get married and spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been? Which regret can you live with? Rebecca didn't have an answer. Over the next few weeks, the doubts grew stronger. She started canceling dates with Nathan, claiming she was tired or had to work late. She stopped responding to his texts as quickly. She made excuses not to see Sophie, even though it broke her heart. Nathan noticed, of course. He tried to talk to her about it, but Rebecca shut down every conversation. I just need some space, she'd say. Wedding planning is stressful. But they hadn't even started planning the wedding. Nathan had suggested they wait a few months anyway, to give Sophie time to adjust to the idea and to find a house they all loved. The real problem was that Rebecca was pulling away because she was terrified. Terrified of not being enough. Terrified of disappointing them. Terrified of failing at the one thing she wanted most. One night she was staring at her phone, looking at a message from Nathan. He'd sent a photo of Sophie holding up a drawing she'd made. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands with a big heart above them. The caption read, Sophie made this for you today. She misses you. We both do. Rebecca's finger hovered over the reply button, but she couldn't type anything. What could she say? That she was having second thoughts, that she was scared? That she wasn't sure she deserved this happiness? Her phone rang. It was Nathan. She let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. Finally, she answered. Rebecca, we need to talk, Nathan said. His voice was gentle but firm. I'm coming over. Please don't tell me no. 20 minutes later, he was at her door. Rebecca let him in, and they sat across from each other at her small kitchen table. Talk to me, Nathan said. Tell me what's really going on. And please don't say you're just tired or stressed. I know you better than that. Rebecca stared at her hands, at the engagement ring that suddenly felt heavy. I don't think I can do this. Do what? Marry me? All of it. Be a wife. Be a mother. I'm too old, Nathan. I'm set in my routines. I like my quiet apartment and my predictable life. What if I can't adapt? What if I'm not what Sophie needs? What if I'm not what you need? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hands. Is that really what you're afraid of? Or are you afraid of being happy? Rebecca's head snapped up. What? You've spent so many years convinced you don't deserve a second chance. Convinced you're not worthy of love because of your age or your divorce or whatever stories you tell yourself. And now that happiness is right in front of you, you're looking for reasons to push it away. That's not, Rebecca started, but Nathan cut her off gently. Rebecca, I don't need you to be perfect. Sophie doesn't need you to be perfect. We just need you to be here, to be present, to be willing to try. Yes, this will be hard sometimes. Yes, there will be challenges, but we'll face them together. But what if I fail? Rebecca whispered. What if you don't? Nathan countered. What if this works out better than either of us could imagine? What if you're exactly what we need, exactly as you are? Rebecca felt the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. I'm scared. I know. I'm scared too. Taking care of Sophie, suddenly being responsible for another human being, it terrifies me every single day. I'm scared I'm not doing it right. I'm scared I'm messing her up. I'm scared I'm not enough. But then I remember that I don't have to do it alone. I have you. You shouldn't have to convince me to marry you, Rebecca said. If I was the right person, I wouldn't have these doubts. Everyone has doubts. That's normal. What's not normal is letting those doubts destroy something beautiful before it even has a chance to fully bloom. Nathan squeezed her hands. I love you. Sophie loves you. We want to build a life with you, but only if that's what you want too. I can't force this. You have to choose it. Rebecca looked at him through her tears. This man who'd been so patient with her, who'd never pushed or demanded, who loved her despite all her fears and insecurities. And she thought about Sophie. Sweet Sophie, who'd lost her mother and was brave enough to love again anyway. Who'd drawn that picture of their family with so much hope. I need some time, Rebecca finally said. To think. To figure out if I can do this. The hurt in Nathan's eyes was unmistakable, but he nodded. Okay. But Rebecca? Don't take too long. Sophie is already calling you her mama. If you're going to walk away, please do it now before she gets hurt even more. He stood up to leave, and Rebecca felt panic rise in her chest. But she let him go. She let him walk out the door without calling him back. And then she was alone in her quiet apartment, with nothing but her doubts for company. Rebecca spent 3 days drowning in her own thoughts. She called in sick to work for the first time in years. She ignored calls from Victoria. She sat in her apartment, staring at the walls, trying to figure out what she really wanted. On the 3rd day, she finally picked up when Victoria called. I'm coming over, her sister said. No room for argument. Victoria arrived with Thai food and a stern expression. She set the containers on the coffee table and sat down across from Rebecca. Okay, talk. What are you doing? I don't know, Rebecca admitted. I thought I wanted this. Marriage, family, all of it. But now that it's real, I'm terrified. Of course you're terrified. Love is terrifying, especially when you've been hurt before. Victoria opened a container of pad thai. But you know what's more terrifying? Regret. Spending the rest of your life wondering what if. What if I'm not good enough? For who, Nathan? That man worships the ground you walk on. Sophie? That little girl lights up every time you walk in the room. Or are you talking about yourself? What if you're not good enough for your own impossible standards? Rebecca picked at the food without really eating. Everyone keeps telling me that age doesn't matter. That 43 isn't old. But I remember that matchmaking event, Victoria. I remember every man who looked at me like I was expired goods. Those men were idiots. Nathan isn't one of those men. But what if deep down he thinks the same thing? What if he settles for me because I'm convenient? Because I'm good with Sophie, and then later he realizes he could have done better? Victoria set down her fork and grabbed Rebecca's hands. Listen to me. You are choosing fear over love. You're letting a few jerks from a stupid event define your worth. Nathan chose you. Sophie chose you. The only person who hasn't chosen you is yourself. I don't know if I can do this, Rebecca whispered. Yes, you can. You're one of the strongest people I know. You've survived a divorce, rebuilt your entire life, and found your purpose helping others. You can definitely handle being loved. What if I mess it up? Then you mess it up and you try again. That's what families do. They mess up and they forgive and they keep showing up anyway. After Victoria left, Rebecca sat alone with her thoughts. She looked around her apartment. Everything was exactly where she wanted it. Clean, organized, quiet, safe. and completely empty. She thought about Nathan's house, the chaos of Sophie's toys scattered across the living room, the fingerprints on the windows, the noise and mess and beautiful, unpredictable life happening in every corner. She thought about Sophie's laugh, the way the little girl held her hand, the trust in those dark eyes that had once been so guarded. She thought about Nathan's patience, his kindness, the way he looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd never known to ask. And she realized something. She'd been so focused on whether she was good enough for them that she'd never stopped to ask if they were good enough for her. And they were. They were everything. The next morning, Rebecca woke up with a sense of clarity. She needed to see Sophie, needed to talk to her before she made any final decisions. She drove to the shelter, knowing that Nathan usually brought Sophie there on Saturday mornings while he handled errands. Sure enough, she spotted them in the garden where Nathan had proposed. Rebecca was about to call out to them when she noticed something. The shelter was hosting their monthly art therapy showcase, and children's artwork was displayed on easels throughout the garden. She walked through slowly, looking at paintings and drawings. Then she stopped dead in her tracks. Sophie's artwork was unmistakable. A family portrait done in crayon and paint. 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. One tall figure labeled Uncle Nathan, one small figure labeled me, and one medium-sized figure labeled My New Mama Rebecca. But it was the words written across the top that made Rebecca's knees weak. My forever family. Rebecca stood there, staring at the picture, tears streaming down her face. This child, who had every reason to be scared of loving and losing again, had chosen to hope anyway. Had chosen to love anyway. Had chosen Rebecca anyway. Miss Rebecca, Sophie's voice rang out across the garden. The little girl had spotted her and was running full speed, her pigtails bouncing. Rebecca caught Sophie in her arms, holding her tight. Hi, sweetheart. I missed you. I missed you too.
Where were you?
Uncle Nathan said you needed time to think, but I made you a picture and you weren't there to see it, and... Sophie pulled back, her face worried. Are you crying? Did I do something wrong? No, baby. You did everything right. Rebecca wiped her eyes. I saw your picture. The family portrait. Sophie's face lit up. Do you like it? I worked really hard on it. I love it. It's the most beautiful picture I've ever seen. Nathan had walked over during this exchange. He stood a few feet away, his expression guarded. Rebecca could see the hurt in his eyes, the walls he'd started building to protect himself. Can I talk to Uncle Nathan alone for a minute? Rebecca asked Sophie. Sophie nodded and ran off to show her picture to another volunteer. Rebecca stood up, facing Nathan. I'm sorry. For what? For letting fear almost destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me. For pulling away when I should have pulled closer. For doubting us when all the evidence shows that we're meant to be together. Nathan's expression softened slightly. Rebecca, wait, let me finish. She took a deep breath. I've spent so many years believing I wasn't enough. That I was too old, too damaged, too set in my ways. And when you proposed, part of me thought it was too good to be true. That eventually you'd realize you'd made a mistake. I would never. I know that now. Because I finally understand something. This isn't about age or timing or being perfect. It's about choosing to show up. Choosing to love even when it's scary. Choosing to build something beautiful even when you're not sure you know how. What are you saying? Rebecca pulled the engagement ring from her pocket. She'd been carrying it around for days, unable to decide whether to put it back on or return it. I'm saying yes. To everything. To marriage and family and all the messy, beautiful chaos that comes with it. I'm saying I choose you and Sophie and this life we're building together. I'm saying I'm ready to stop being afraid. Nathan's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? Because if you're not, I've never been more sure of anything. Rebecca slipped the ring back on her finger. I love you. I love Sophie. And I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that love doesn't have an expiration date. Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I love you too. We both do. Uncle Nathan, Miss Rebecca, come see. They turned to find Sophie standing in front of her artwork, bouncing excitedly. They walked over hand in hand. I'm glad you came back, Sophie said to Rebecca. I told Uncle Nathan you would. I told him you just needed to remember that we're a family. Rebecca knelt down to Sophie's level. You were right. And Sophie, I want to ask you something important. Would it be okay if I officially became your mama? Not just pretend, but real. Through marriage and adoption and everything. Sophie's eyes went wide. Then she launched herself at Rebecca, wrapping her little arms around her neck. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Sophie pulled back, her face glowing. Can I tell everyone?
Can I tell them right now?
You can tell whoever you want, Rebecca laughed. Sophie grabbed Rebecca's hand and pulled her toward a small group of people looking at the artwork. The shelter director was there, along with several volunteers and other children. Everyone, Sophie announced loudly. This is my mama. Not my birth mama, but my forever mama. Her name is Rebecca, and she's going to marry Uncle Nathan, and we're going to be a real family. The shelter director, who'd watched Rebecca volunteer for years, smiled warmly. Congratulations, Rebecca. You deserve all the happiness in the world. But Sophie wasn't done. She pulled Rebecca through the garden, introducing her to everyone they passed. That's my mama, she'd say proudly, pointing at Rebecca. She was scared at first, but she's not scared anymore. She loves me and Uncle Nathan, and we love her, and we're a family. By the time they'd made a complete circle of the garden, Rebecca was crying again, but this time they were happy tears. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat on a bench under a large oak tree. Sophie was between them, holding both their hands. When we get married, Sophie asked, can I be the flower girl? And can we have chocolate cake? And can we get a dog? Nathan and Rebecca looked at each other over Sophie's head and burst out laughing. We'll see about the dog, Nathan said, but yes to everything else. And can I call you Mama all the time now? Sophie asked Rebecca. Not just when we're with other people? Rebecca's heart swelled. I would love that. Sophie leaned her head against Rebecca's shoulder, content. I knew you'd come back. I knew you were my mama even when you didn't know it yet. Rebecca looked at Nathan and he took her free hand, the one with the ring that was now back where it belonged. They sat there as a family under the oak tree in the garden where Nathan had proposed, where Sophie had created art that showed their future, where Rebecca had finally found the courage to choose love. 6 months later, they stood in that same garden, surrounded by friends and family. Rebecca wore a simple ivory dress. Sophie wore purple, her favorite color, and carried a basket of flower petals. Nathan stood at the altar, looking at Rebecca like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. As Rebecca walked,